Often when people talk about digital transformation and becoming an adaptable organization able to respond to technology-enabled opportunities or changing customer expectations, the mind automatically goes to agile methodologies like Scrum and Kanban and how a delivery team can operate. But delivery teams don't operate in isolation. They operate within the context of an organization. And in previous talks where I've talked about the organizational immune system, it's these organizational processes that also have to be adapted to enable an organization to operate in a change ready footing. So today, I'm going to provide a little bit of an overview of what an adaptable organization looks like from an operating model perspective and the breadth of processes that need to be changed and the relationship between them. My name is Chris Buxton, and this is one of my digital insights. So digital transformation has become synonymous with the deployment of an agile process, whether that's Scrum or Kanban or SAFe or one of those other frameworks. But I think this is limiting what organizations are able to achieve because they're designed around a particular context. They're designed around a particular way of working for software development. If we think back to the Agile Manifesto as it was originally designed in 2001, it was the Agile Manifesto for software development. It wasn't an Agile Manifesto for adaptive organizations. It was designed by a group of people that were very interested in how to improve software delivery within organizations and the behaviors and attributes of an organization that gave a better chance of success. Following that, we've seen the definition of frameworks like Scrum and Kanban and SAFe. But they're almost a response to an organizational approach to how it manages change. Organizations like to package change up. They like to have a process. They like to have something where they can say, this is our start, this is our end, and when we reach the end, we've achieved our goal. And Scrum allows you to do that because it follows a nice process. You can train your people up. If you're implementing it, you can train your people up and you can tick a box and say, yes, I've got so many Scrum Masters certified and I've rolled out daily stand-ups and those sorts of things. But at its heart, it doesn't really change how you operate as an organization. It changes the way your delivery teams operate, but it doesn't change how you operate as an organization. I think for me, I go back to the original intent behind the Agile Manifesto, and the manifesto itself talks about individual interactions over processes and tools. It talks about the delivery of working software or the delivery of value over comprehensive documentation. It talks about customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and it talks about responding to change over following a plan. When I read those as the values that the Agile Manifesto was talking about, what it's talking about is becoming a learning organization that focuses on personal interactions and conversations over trying to slavishly follow a process that produces a contract or a project plan or some other document that describes what you're going to do. I think the reason behind that is that ultimately the customer or user or whoever you're building the solution for doesn't really understand what they need. I think most of the evidence is that customers don't really understand what they need until you plonk it in front of them. So they very much know what they don't need, but they can't articulate that until you've actually delivered something working in front of them. If you're to ask them for requirements, the requirements you'll get is what they want, which is based on what they needed 2 to 3 years ago. It's not necessarily what they need going into the future. So the whole approach is to build incrementally based on conversations and learning as you go so that you evolve a solution going forward. And I think that does scale out. I think that does allow you to think about how an organization needs to operate going forward. to enable the best outcome from your transformation and enabling a change-ready organisation. Certainly the deployment of Scrum and things like that, I think, is undermining the general principles of Agile and the general principles of becoming a change-ready organisation, because what tends to happen is that teams will roll out Scrum, they will try and implement it in their organisation, and we have then organisational challenges because Scrum doesn't talk about project management. Scrum is quite explicit that you don't need a project manager. It doesn't talk about continual reporting. It doesn't talk about enterprise visibility and those other things that organisations need to enable them to have oversight of their investments and the delivery of value. So it's silent on those things. So when it gets rolled out to teams, areas like enterprise portfolio offices, finance departments, investment team groups, and those sorts of things lose some of their process elements that they rely on to enable them to do their job. Now, because of that, and then we still see issues around delivery and those sorts of things. The organisation then turns around and says, well, we've tried Agile, it didn't work for us, therefore it's not right for us as an organisation. I think it's not right for organisations because they don't change any of the other processes that wrap around Agile to enable them to be a change-ready organisation. And if you don't do that, you don't fully realise the benefit of an Agile approach. And ultimately, Agile is just a way of doing something. And whether you're doing Scrum or Kanban or even doing a mini waterfall, it's just an incremental change process. And I think organisations can implement any of those processes they like based on the skill set they've got available. But if the organisation around them isn't able to deliver and realise the value from that incremental change, then it's pointless being Agile. It's pointless trying to talk about Agile. And I think because of that, I talk about being an adaptive organisation over being an Agile organisation, because Agile today has certain connotations. And what we actually want is an organisation that is able to respond and manage change, which is more about being adaptive. So when I think about the life cycle that I think we should adopt, it's about understanding your goal, understanding your position in relation to that goal, and what are the indicators and the data points you need to shift to get you closer to that goal. It's then about understanding your opportunities and the options you have available to you to move closer to that goal. Now, all of those must be assessed based on value, not just on whether you think they're just going to move you towards your goal. Each one must deliver value, because if it doesn't deliver value, what's the point in doing it? You can then select incremental steps that you implement to enable you to A, deliver value and move closer to your goal, but also learn more about what you need for the future. Because as I say, I don't think users understand what they truly need until you plonk something in front of them, and then they know exactly what they don't need. So these incremental steps allow you as an organization to learn more about what you need for the future, so that you can then, in the final stage, adjust your thinking about what you need, adjust your thinking around your goal and value statements, and then you repeat that cycle, and you repeat that cycle continually. I think if we think about learning and think about digital transformation and becoming a change-ready organisation within that context, we start to realise there's a range of other processes that we need to change to allow that cycle to continue and to operate effectively. Okay, so what are those process areas? I think about a holistic organisational operating model and how it needs to operate. And each of those process areas needs to be able to make decisions, create insights, and inform the learning and the value statements for the organisation, so it can continually make decisions and it can continually learn from what it's doing. And I think if we think like that, there's a number of different process areas that we need to think about. But all of those process areas rely on each other, they all relate to each other, and they all use data from each other. And that's the important part, I think, in this operating model. Because if we can do that and we can share data, we lower the cost of implementing all of these different processes. We create a far more learning-based organization, and whether we're going agile or not, these processes benefit an organization by improving visibility, improving accountability, and improving understanding. So we'll start at the front door effectively. We start at the pipeline and the adaptive portfolio process. So in a traditional planning cycle, we plan for the year, we plan for big investments, and we get a whole bunch of subject matter experts and executives in a room, and we talk about the different investment opportunities. And invariably, we default to whoever's highest rank in the room, and they make the decisions for everybody, which limits our output. But ultimately, we end up with big investments. We end up with things that are going to fill the entire year and take most of our money. Now, we don't realize whether they're the right thing or not until probably towards the end of the year, until we've put it in front of a user and the user has told us it's the wrong thing. But by then we've already spent the money and we haven't delivered the value we were looking for. So that traditional process is part of the challenge we have to overcome. As we start to think about an adaptive portfolio, we start to think about, well, how are you going to create a pipeline of work that you can bring in different options, different ideas, different types of work, whether that's a large investment, an incremental improvement, a small process change, how you can evaluate them based on the value they deliver to the organization and prioritize them and roadmap them for implementation. So you can start to plan out, rather than a slavish plan for the year based on investments, what could be a sequence that can then be reevaluated. Now, that evaluation based on value has to be a data-driven activity, because what you're looking for is, as new ideas, as you learn throughout the year, you can continually improve and can continually plan by allowing a repeatable cycle where people can ingest new work that can be evaluated against a consistent data set and a consistent set of criteria, so that you can adjust your priorities throughout the year. Now, I think that as a process is of high value to organizations, whether you're going agile or not, because prioritization in organization is traditionally a very big sticking point, and it's very difficult. I think my experience is that you end up with these meetings, you'll come up with a list of the top 10, and when you ask which is the number one priority, you'll be told, well, they're all the number one priority. And you then got to try and juggle 10 items to get the outcome. So being able to prioritize based on value, I think, is a critical process for organizations. Once you've got those, they then go into the delivery pipeline and the delivery team process. There are elements here, I think, that are quite important. Yes, you need a life cycle. Yes, you need some sort of delivery life cycle. It may be agile, it may be waterfall, but it needs to be short and incremental. It needs to be based on how you are going to execute a piece of work and deliver value to the organization. And I think if you can do that, you're able to take the pipeline and then deliver out. The other elements of this, though, I think, are thinking about things like architecture and how architecture implements design and agility. Ultimately, when you're making decisions about technology, the key criteria you want to look for is how hard is it going to be to change that in the future. The best decision you can make is implementing the thing that allows you to change easiest in the future. Because if we accept we're going to learn as we go and our need is going to change, we need systems that are able to change. And I think if you're implementing a big bespoke software development project and don't build a mechanism that allows that product to change and evolve in the future, you are creating a legacy problem. You're creating the next roadblock to agility and adaptability for your organization. So the technology choices you make are as important as the process you follow in implementing them. As you've implemented, though, and you drive that solution into operations, how we deliver operations equally is important, because I've been in change organizations where the change management process, you had to submit a change request. You then had to wait for a change control board to sit. That change control board could ask a bunch of questions. It would then go around in a cycle, and it would all added slowness. It all impacted the pace of change and how rapidly you were able to realize the benefit. I think some of the excellent research we've seen over the years is looking at the real benefit of those sorts of change and release processes. And I think a lot of evidence is that they add limited value, that an enabled team that is able to deploy themselves is able to respond to issues far quicker than a team that follows this sort of rigorous change control process. And because of that, the outcome tends to be better quality and a better outcome, because those accountable for the release and the change are the ones executing and the ones that making the decision. So I think those elements you have to look at. But ultimately, if we're going to learn and we're going to adapt, part of that learning experience is understanding the impact of the change that we're going to make. So the processes around the application portfolio and understanding our technology environment is a critical component in understanding change. Because if you've got to do a month's worth of analysis before you can implement any sort of technology change, again, that slows down. It's a high cost of entry for even a minor change, which impacts your ability to be adaptable. So the operational area is all about understanding the operational environment, understanding the impact of change, and understanding the cost and value that is derived, which then links us back to the financial management processes. This one's quite an interesting one, I think, because traditionally, I think in a lot of organizations, finance departments is where you hold the value or the definition of value, whether that's organizational outputs or income or those sorts of things. It's also where we manage costs. I think if you would look to most business case processes and how we manage pipeline, it's straight cost benefit analysis, probably erring more towards costs than we do benefit. But I think in linking that, understanding the cost of our technology delivery and our digital services, being able to link them directly to the value for the organization, not only allows us to really understand the value of change as we're delivering it, it also allows us to incrementally over time understand the value of services. So as services get old, usually the value that we're deriving from them diminishes. And at some point you will reach a point where it's either replace or significant update. And I think understanding that life cycle and linking it to the financial benefits that you're getting from a system allow you to manage your environment a lot better and make decisions around it. Similarly, I think when we think about security and how we manage risk in an organization, that visibility and transparency in your environment is critical, because if we're going to assess change and understand the security implications and risk implications of change, we have to be very clear on what is the area that is impacted, and what are the possible implications of that change. Again, if we look at traditional security processes, they tend to be quite a long, difficult security assessment at the end of product development. That's before it's allowed into production, before it's allowed to process any sort of private data or any sensitive data at all, or be exposed to a customer. Again, that's slow because it impacts our ability to deliver value from a supposedly already complete product. So security process needs to become far more integrated into our delivery. But also it needs to be able to rapidly assess the impact of change as it goes into production. You cannot make it a people-based assessment. I think a lot of time now we rely on our security experts to look at environments, look at configuration, look at the technology solution, and then make a call based on that. We have to become far more reliant on technology to enable that, because if you're relying on a subject matter expert, A, it's slow, B, they make mistakes, and C, they become your bottleneck almost for moving into production. And on all of these processes, whether it's your ingest pipeline or your output and delivering value, as soon as you're relying on a subject matter expert in any of those processes, you've hit a constraint point. And in all of this, using data to remove those constraint points is critical. So data and analytics is a big component of this, because I think all of these different process areas need to produce data, but that data needs to be of the right format and context to be digested across the organization. I think one of the big problems I see in organizations is that these process areas operate in silos. So finance will decide how it's going to manage finance. IT operations will decide how it's going to run IT operations. And if there is an overlapping data need, each of them will fire out a spreadsheet to the other and say, go and fill this out, because the data they've currently got available isn't in the format or isn't in the right way. Now that's cost and delay. So again, it's impacting your ability to make decisions because the data you need to have available to you to make those decisions isn't available to you. I've been on the receiving end of these where you get a spreadsheet from finance because they want to do a whole of organization IT cost analysis, and you get spreadsheets every quarter or every 6 months that you then have to try and fill out and manipulate all of the information you've got available to you to fit the format that finance are going to be using. Ultimately, it needs to be in a format that enables multiple use cases and multiple uses in an organization. And that's why data and analytics is so important. So in the IT operations area, IT operations understand cost from the number of CPUs something uses, the amount of RAM, the software products that's sitting on there, the network that connects it. Finance understands it from invoices and contracts. And in the middle, you need data to translate between the two. And if we think in those terms, what you're able then to do is use IT operations data to create a forward plan of cost, to be able to understand the impact of cost before you've of a change before you've implemented it. Because the big challenge we have in all of this, as organizations adopt cloud-based services, we move from a slow capital-based model to a highly adaptable operating-based model. And a user asking for an extra, 16 cores and 32 gig of RAM on a server can add significant cost to an organization before you've got an invoice and before you realize that cost has been incurred. So understanding and using data to underpin decision making is vital in this operation, because otherwise organizations are very quick to adopt, very slow to retire. And that is a general trend globally. So you can make organizations are very quick to make decisions to buy new software products or implement new things. It's very slow to retire or get rid of stuff. And I think you need the data to enable that. The final component, though, I think is the people capability, because people need to be able to adapt and respond equally. And I think that's how people learn. It goes to how people learn. It's about how they adopt change. It's how they deal with change. Again, in a traditional waterfall model, it waits until you've got a product to put in front of someone before you start training them. Well, that's too late. That's the end of the cycle, and it means that you've got no user engagement and no user learning until you've put something in front of them. And as I've already explained, when you put it in front of them, that's when they'll tell you you've built the wrong thing. So you need that learning and experience moving forward. So creating the culture and the learning environment based on communities so that people can learn and collaborate with each other to improve as they go, enables you to immediately realize benefit of any new change or any new service that you're putting in place. And that's an important facet of this, because otherwise what your staff see is a constantly disrupting environment and a constant change environment. So you need to put in place the services, capabilities and processes that support them in this changing environment, but doesn't slow things down. I think that's just a very rapid introduction to the process areas that I think need to be adapted as part of a change into become a change-ready organization. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to drill into each of these process areas in a little bit more detail, starting right at the start with the adaptive portfolio, because I think the starting point for any organization has to be get control of your input, get control of the work that you're undertaking. And that allows you to use that then to adapt and change other process areas as you go. If you haven't got control of that input pipeline, you're constantly fighting fires, you're constantly overworked, and you're struggling with no priorities. So for me, that initial adaptive portfolio piece is the first process that we should be starting with in any organization. Because if you haven't, as I say, if you haven't got priorities, what are you working to? How do staff know what is the most important thing for them? So that is a basic overview. I'm going to talk a lot more about an adaptive portfolio. If you want to listen to some more of my talks, subscribe to my channel. My name is Chris Buxton, and this is one of my digital insights.